Hey, I went. Okay, cool. So again, I do these impromptu things, and I never think anyone's gonna join, but I guess with 18,000 subscribers, if 7 or 8 people join, that'll be nice. Cool. We've already got like 10 people. Okay, so I am on the piano right now, and I have this wonderful thingy, and I'm hoping that I can like set this up. I think it's backwards, but I can set this up in such a way that you can see what I'm doing at the piano. My plan was to show you a couple of things that I've been working on, show you a tune I've been working on, show you some improvisational concepts for the piano, the chordal lick. Oh my gosh. But, here's my question for all of you. Do you want me to start with showing you some of those piano things? That's not going to be interactive because I'm not going to be able to see your comments when you all are up there, and just kind of show you what I'm talking about. Or do you want me to like answer some questions first and then get into that later? So what do you guys think? Whoever says first what their preferences is going to win. Okay, cool. All right, I'll show you my stuff. So let me see if I can get you. Hold on. Don't get vertigo. Okay. Yeah, okay, let's see. Let's see if I can figure out how the crap to do this. Give me 1 second. Boop. Boop. Boopity doopity doopity boop. Oh, it's bendy. Look at this. It bends. I thought it had like a thing. Okay, wait. So this is, I'm an idiot. This is correct orientation, so that means that's going to be correct orientation of the piano. Okay, so let's do this. Ah. Ooh. Okay. All right. Can you all see that? Is that correct? Someone tell me if that's right. Okay, cool, sweet, awesome. Hopefully I'll make sure to, okay, so we're going from here to here, that's pretty good. Okay, so a couple of interesting things. One, I just realized that when I improvise at the piano, a lot of the time, like the harmonic choices that I make, I'm going to try to not make this just entirely jazz, I'll make it some other stuff, but a lot of the harmonic choices I make involve me just melodically exploring a particular, like, you know, arriving on a certain scale degree and then using that as a pivot point for a modulation. Like, for example, if I'm on G Dorian, you know, maybe I hear some kind of yada, and then maybe I want to make this like the third of a minor chord, right? Right, and so then I go to like F sharp minor, right? And it's a combination of that with also like where you're moving on the circle of fifths, right? So if you're dealing with diatonic pitch collections, then you can think about how far you're moving on. This is something that Jacob Collier talks about, of course. You can think about whether or not you're moving clockwise or counterclockwise, and by what distance, right? So F sharp minor, anytime you go down a half step, that takes you 5 ticks bright on the circle of fifths. And we can perpetuate that too. Right, sorry, I accidentally played a G sharp there. But, you know, so that we're constantly getting a sense of brightening, but it's also interesting because in that case, the chords are moving, down. And so there's this combination of like, it sounds like it's going down, but at the same time, it's brightening on the circle of fifths. And you can do the same thing with major. And then once you have an idea like that, you can explore what kinds of common tones exist. And I also like the idea of utilizing like two tones that are by half step that can exist diatonically in one key, but in another key can't exist diatonically. And so it's a kind of yin and yang. So for example, if I'm on like C major, both B and C exist in that diatonic pitch collection and sound chill, right? But if I'm on D flat underneath, ooh, that's teetering because we're going Mixolydian, right? Ionian, Mixolydian, Ionian, right? And technically speaking, if we're going to be technical, this totally implies Mixolydian, but this could be Ionian or Lydian. And that gets to a conversation about, you know, modality. Like if I just play a major chord right here, there is no, you know, it's not even that we know that we're in Ionian, you know, major chord, because if we just have a C major chord, I mean, this could be a part of like so many different things. It could be a part of, you know, it could be a part of an octatonic scale for all we know, right? It could be a part of a hexatonic scale, right? You know, like, you know, it could be a part of the Lydian. It could be a part of Ionian, it could be a part of Mixolydian, and so just major chords and minor chords in and of themselves are very ambiguous, right? And so it's up to you to figure out what you want to do with them, and you could use those as pivots moving between different modalities, right? So again, you know, one common example, for example, of this kind of thing that happens in jazz, moving between like symmetrical and asymmetrical pitch collections, asymmetrical being like the modes of melodic minor, the standard diatonic modes, the pentatonic scale, all that stuff, which, by the way, well, I won't get into the technical details too much. But if I go, let's say that I have a standard 2-5-1 progression in jazz. You know, that's essentially just like a juiced up D minor 7, G dominant 7 going to C, right? If I decide to add, you know, the jazzers call it flat 5, but that's not technically correct. If I decide to have a C sharp and omit the 5th, right, that can still go to C, right? Right, and you can even resolve it. You can go. Sorry, I need to look at what I'm doing on the piano. But if I were to add this, what do you notice about this? Well, one, it's just a substitution for a G dominant 7, and it's kind of a bit of a tritone sub. And there's an interesting thing, not to get too crazy, but this is a completely symmetrical pitch collection, right? We have a major third, and then we have a major third down here, and they're separated. You know, the axis is F sharp, even though F sharp doesn't exist on the chord. Right, and so if I revoice this chord down here, it's the same exact chord, right? So because of the fact that this is completely symmetrical, I can use it as a pivot, right? So if I go D minor 7, and then I decide to use that C sharp, that sharp 11, I can use that either to go to C, or I can use that to go to G flat major, aka F sharp major. And the reason is, again, because of the tritone substitution, F sharp major is the key that is a tritone away from C, right? And so that dominant 7th chord, this juiced up dominant 7th chord, is the exact same. The basic point that I'm trying to make is that D flat dominant 7 omit 5 sharp 11, or just, you know, flat 5 if you want to call it like the jazzers do, is the exact same as G dominant 7 omit 5 sharp 11. It's the same exact chord, and so you could use it to go to one of two locations. The other point that I was going to make is that this could actually exist inside of a whole tone scale, right? Right, remember the point that I made earlier about this C major chord, you know, it can just be a part of the major scale, but it also could be a part of the octatonic scale. Just the chord in and of itself is ambiguous. The same thing is true with this. So you could play the whole tone scale, and then you could use it as a standard resolution, or once we go into the whole tone scale, because the whole tone scale is completely symmetrical, we can literally place any note of the whole tone scale in the bass, and as long as it resolves with root motion, we can arrive there. So check this out. Like, I know this is getting into some advanced stuff, but if I go from D minor 7 to this sonority, which is essentially just a juiced up G dominant 7, that is whole tony, right? It can exist in the whole tone scale. Now I can put literally any note of this whole tone scale in the bass, and it becomes the 5 of a 1. So all of you know, so one of you will make this interactive. Pick a note of this whole tone scale: D flat, E flat, F, G, A, or B. Just someone pick one arbitrarily. Pick one. First come, first serve. B. Okay, great. So if B is the dominant, that means E major or E minor is going to be our tonic, right? So I'm in D minor, right? As a 2 chord, we're in C major. So C major is far from E major, so that's a good choice that you made. Right, so check this out. I can put B in the bass, same sonority up here, right? And then, hey, guess what? We arrive at G major. We arrive at E major, right? Because the whole tone scale can take you anywhere, right? So someone said G. We can do the same thing with G, right? And of course, G just takes us to C, right? Let's do it with all of them, just to be thorough, just to be fun, right? So we did B, or we did G. So let's do A. works great. How about F? Right? Works perfectly. How about E flat? Right? And then finally D flat, which of course takes us to the tritone 7. Right, so bottom line is, that's just an abstract concept I want to give to you guys, that anytime you play any kind of chord, remember that that chord is ambiguous and can exist. It has a possibility. It's almost like in quantum superposition. It could be and this, it could be that, it could be this, it could be that. Anytime you play a small chord, there are lots of different things that you could do with it, and so it's always a good idea to think about how you can use the pivot chords or pivot notes to get you to certain locations. Like another kind of progression that I use all the time in my own music that I really enjoy is the staggered fifth progression, right? So let's say I have C major 7, right? If I move the E and the B down, it of course becomes a C minor 7, right? And then if I move the C and the G down, it becomes C flat, aka B major 7, and then we can just repeat the process, right? And then it makes a really nice bed for improvising over, right? That's literally just you can repeat it on forever and ever and ever. And I really like these kinds of harmonic sequences, especially if you just do some slight modal reinterpretations. Like one of my favorites is if I have, let's say we're at C major. C major goes to, I'm going to try to read the complete ultimate reason for the whole tone versatility is because the dominant 7 flat 9. Right. Yeah, this will stay on YouTube. Yeah. So if I have a C major chord, and let's say I go to E minor, right? I can think of E minor as the 3 chord in C major, or I can think of E minor in any context where E minor belongs, right? So let's say if I went, let's actually do the opposite. Let's go E minor to C major, right? And then if I'm in C major, let's say that maybe C major, I'm going to be a part of a mixolydian scale now. So then what are some chord choices that I have that are mixolydian? G minor. And now we can do the same thing with G minor. And keep going, right? And so I love those things. Right? Doesn't that sound really nice to you guys? And it's modulating all over the place, but it's just that simple reinterpretation of that one chord, right? Bottom line, any chord can be interpreted based upon what came before it or what came after it, and the interpretation does not have to be the same, right? So again, we're in E minor, we go to the 6th chord, but then we pretend like that's 1 in mixolydian, and now we go to G minor, now we pretend like G minor is 1, and then we go to 6, and so on and so forth, right? You can create all kinds of fascinating, another interesting one that I like to do a lot is, let's say C major going to E minor, and then if we're in E minor and we're thinking of ourselves as being in harmonic minor, we can go to B major. And now that B major, we have arrived at it as the 5 chord in E minor, we can reinterpret it as 1 and go to 3 again, right? And, right, I don't know if you guys recognize that from the first movement of my symphony and also in the 4th movement of my symphony, but that's how that progression works. And then each of those chords, there are all kinds of modal stuff that you can do on top of that, right? So, again, there's just a lot of kind of fun exploratory stuff that can be had, right? But yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And also that moving downward, John Williams. Someone said it sounds like John Williams E.T., right? That's literally just D flat, C major, B major, and then he jumps up to D, right, a half step above. And that's also, well, I've already talked about that in my How to Write Like John Williams video, so we don't need to go into that too detailed. But yeah, no, it's beautiful, especially at the end of the film. That's a beautiful, beautiful moment. Another thing that I've been experimenting with are split third sonorities, right? So one example. So first off, the idea of a split third sonority, or even just a split sonority in general, is where you have multiple half steps in a row and you have incompatible, kind of tones. So for example, like this could all exist inside of Lydian, right? But if I have C, E flat, E, and B, unless you're thinking of the hexatonic scale, that cannot exist inside the same mode, right? And you can do the same thing with a split third, right? And if you voice these in, chunky ways like that, they can sound pretty awful. But if you voice them nicely, like for example, what I did in like one of the voicings from the first movement of my second symphony, right? Right, that's that first harmonic movement, right? And so the idea is, check this out, I think you guys will enjoy this. So I have F sharp major, I have this major seventh in the bass, which is a very dissonant major seventh voicing, right? I really like that half step, and I use that in the third movement of my first symphony. And then if I put that E in the bass, now we have a major seventh and a minor seventh, but because the E is so far away, it's not that dissonant, right? And then the E steps down to D, and then right? So E steps down to D, and then this G sharp, F sharp, sorry, steps down to E, to F, and then check this out. This is what I think is so cool about this progression. If I have an F and an E, they can't belong, like I said before, in the same F sharp, right? F sharp, Mixolydian, and Ionian, they're incompatible. They can't both belong. But in D minor, they can belong to the same pitch collection, right? So that's the cool thing about this progression is you're taking two tones, which are always dissonant, but you're going from a pitch collection where they cannot coexist into a pitch collection where they can coexist. And that gives you a kind of tension and release, which I think is interesting, right? So, right? So there's a lot of fun to be had with these kinds of like harmonic concepts and things like that. So in conclusion, I'll play you a tune that I just wrote recently. It's just a jazz tune. It's fresh on my fingers, so forgive me if I botch it. But then we'll talk about the harmonization because it's pretty simple, but there are also some kind of a little bit out there parts, and so I'll explain it. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's just go through that bar by bar and talk about harmonically what's going on, right? So I'll play it slowly first off just to let you process it, and then I'll talk about the harmonic choices. through that bar by bar, right? So I'm assuming all of you know what a 2-5-1 progression is, and I'm assuming all of you know what a tritone substitution is, right? It's two really, really common concepts in jazz, and so I'm not gonna, explain those. I'm assuming you're gonna know them. But so first off, this melody, this harmonic progression, which essentially is just E flat major 7, E flat augmented major 7, right? Going to C minor 7, and then of course B flat minor 7, E dominant 7, A flat, right? There are two components to that. One is the fact that it's essentially just we're in 1, right, and then 5 of 6 going to 6, right? Because C minor is, of course, the relative minor of E flat major. And the normal way we get there in secondary dominant classical terms is just by using G dominant 7, right? E flat major, G going to C minor. The second thing we can do is we can use a G dominant 7 in second inversion, which gives us this nice walking bass line. The next thing that we can do is involve a substitution, right? And so check out the idea of this G with an E flat down at the bottom, right? So it creates this nice, juicy sort of sonority, but it's very smooth voice leading from E flat major 7 to that, and then the voice leading is just super smooth, right? Because one E flat stays the same, the bass goes down to C, this B goes down to E flat, and then the D goes up to, so... right? Very, very, very smooth voice leading. But essentially, I literally just think of this as a substitution for G dominant 7, right? It's a G, right? And it doesn't have the dominant 7th, it has the E flat in it, right? Right? It's essentially just, like G augmented, which is a substitution. And that's a substitution for C minor. For G dominant 7 going to C minor. It's the whole tony thing. But I also have the 5th in there, right? And so that's a kind of hexatonic Star Wars kind of sound. Anyway, so that's what I'm thinking there. I can see your comments, by the way, so feel free to ask me questions if you have anything. And then a nice little D in the melody, which slips down. So where does B flat come from, right? Well, essentially what I'm thinking is what I thought is I eventually want to have minor 4 going to 1, right? So if we're in the key of C major, I'll just show you, right? We have F minor. That's just F minor going to C major, right? And Jacob Collier talks about how that has the same polarity as C major that G dominant 7 has going to C major, right? And of course, this modal mixture, you can think about it like borrowing from a minor if you use E flat, right? Or if I keep the E, it's melodic minor, F melodic minor. But anyway, that's essentially what's happening E flat major, right? So I'm thinking, what I thought is I want to have A flat minor going to E flat major, right? But then how do I get there? Well, I can go from A flat major to A flat minor, right? And that actually sounds kind of nice. That's like, again, I'm translating it to C major to make it easy for you guys. But if we have F, right? 4 major, add 6, 4 minor, add 6, going to 1, right? That's the same thing happening here. In E flat major, that translated would be really, really nice, right? But then I think, how do I go to A flat major? Well, let's do a 2-5-1. So what would be a 2-5-1 in A flat major? B flat dominant 7, E flat dominant, B flat minor 7, E flat dominant 7, A flat. And so the entire progression is... That's literally how that entire progression works, right? Does that make sense? Like, at least nominally, right? It's all functional harmony. It's all completely functional harmony. And then the only thing that happens here is just a turnaround, which is just a really, really common, instead of arriving on E flat major, right? We go to G minor, right? Or E flat major in first inversion. It's sort of the same thing. And then we can go to, right, F sharp, fully diminished, which is just the upper neighbor diminished chord that goes to F minor. That's one thing a lot of classical pianists don't realize. Classical people are always like, oh, if I'm going to F minor, then I'm going to use E, because E, the diminished chord that's created from E, is the upper structure of C, dominant 7, flat 9, which is a part of F harmonic minor, and that's the proper way to do it. 7 diminished 7, right? But in jazz, we just think of them as neighbor diminished chords, right? So I can go from E, fully diminished 7 to F minor, but I can also go from F sharp, fully diminished 7 to F minor. One is up a half step, the other one's down a half step, right? And then the only other diminished chord is the one that involves F, and you can do that too, right? And that happens a lot in bossa nova music, so that encompasses all the categories of diminished chords. But anyway, so it's essentially just E flat over G, F sharp, fully diminished, and then 2-5 back to 1, right? The music theory of the lick. Right, so now back to the progression. Same thing. Right, and now we just walk down C minor over G, F minor 7, which is a submedian substitution of F minor. And then, of course, another 2-5-1, but then rather than doing the walk down, now I walk up. I go E flat major 7, F minor, F sharp diminished 7, right, going up to E flat over G, and then where can this lead? Hey, guess what? E flat is the dominant of A flat minor, so we can go nicely to A flat minor, and now that's a 2-5-1, which takes us to G flat major, right? So we modulated away by a minor third, which is 3 ticks on the circle of fifths from E flat major to G flat major, just by using that as a pivot chord. And then it's just a 2-5-1. You guys all know the progression. 2-5-1, 6. And then 6, when we change it in quality to a dominant 7, flat 9, it then becomes 5 of 2 again. Right, that's what happens if I have a 2-5-1 in C major. D minor 7, G dominant 7, C major, and then if I go to A minor, then if I make that A dominant 7, then it takes me back to 2 again, right? It's a turnaround. These things happen all the time in jazz, right? So... there's a kind of crazy thing that happens here, which is kind of a little bit out there, but I think it works, and it's kind of fun. So we arrive on G flat major 7th, right? And then all that happens is I take the 7th and I move it down to become dominant 7th, and then I move the flat. I move the 5th, and it becomes a flat 5, right? Or again, we can think about this as the same augmented. Whole tone scale, not augmented, sorry, whole tone scale thing that we talked about before, right? Just like we talked about earlier with this, right? Right, but it's smooth voice leading, it's completely parsimonious, right? Parsimonious means voice leading by half step. But now that we're here, we are on G flat dominant 7, and then what I do is I use this upper voice as a pivot, right? So this right here is not functional harmony, but it's pivot, right? I keep the B flat, and then I go to G minor 7. Right? G flat dominant 7 technically does not lead to G minor, right? Although you could think about it in the fact that what's G minor's dominant? D, and D belongs to the same whole tone scale that G flat does, and so you could use the whole tone justification, right? But I think the reason that it works is because the melody has this common tone, right? We really hear it as a new thing, G minor 7, and then. What's G dominant 7, G minor 7 going to go to? If it's 2, where is it going to go to? It's going to go to C, right? But then I put C in the bass, but F sharp on top, which is essentially just a really juiced up, it's essentially C dominant 7 with a sharp 11 and a flat 9, but I don't have the 7th in there, right? And then, but check out again what happens here. Really, really smooth voice leading here. This C sharp slips up to D, this F sharp slips up to G sharp, and the F sharp belongs to the same pitch collection that E Mixolydian does. And then that slips up to B, right? And then essentially, basically, all that happens is I just think of this E dominant 7th chord going deceptively, right, to F major. We normally expect it to go to A minor, but we can substitute A minor. The submedian is F, and so we can go. The only difference is I go to F immediately, and I put the E on top. resolves, and it actually resolves to F6, which you can think of like as D minor in first inversion, right? So it's I know it sounds complicated because there's a lot of steps of abstraction, but I mean that's really how jazz harmony works, right? It's just like using this logic you can do this, and then using this logic you can do that, and so if you combine these two things together, then a surface structure results which sounds simultaneously like what on earth did I just hear, but at the same time it sounds like it makes sense, right? So anyway, so G dominant 7 goes to C with an F sharp over C, and then that goes to this, right? And the reason that I chose F6 is because the melody jumps down to F. If I had F major 7, then we get that flat 9 interval, right? You know, can you explain that one more time? Yeah, sure. So A flat minor 7 is 2, D flat 7 is 5, G flat major 7 is 1, right? Now that we're on 1, if you think about I think it's my second or third harmonic relativity video where I talked about how you can change any 1 chord into a 2 chord or a 5 chord, the same thing happens here. This 1 chord turns into a 5 chord, right? It turns into a 5 chord that has that sharp 11 suspension and omit 5, so it's essentially just a juiced up dominant 7th chord. But then I use this B flat as a common tone to go to G minor 7, so that's not functional, but that's a common tone relationship. G minor 7, if we think of it as 2, generally goes to C dominant 7. This is a really juiced up C dominant 7. But then basically all that I was thinking here is I just heard the melody going up to B. I wanted it to reach its way up to B, and so then when I got up to B, I went to F major with E in the bass, with F major on the bass and E on top, which eventually resolves to F major, right? And that's just like in A minor, that's a deceptive cadence, right? The only difference is that I have F in the bass the whole time, and so it's a big juicy 5. It's like when Beethoven does 1 on top of 5 in the Eroica Symphony, right? They're both happening simultaneously. But again, it's just sort of like functional, common tone, not functional, but then functional, and then, right, that just sort of worked its way up, and that now we're in F. And then I do the same thing again, but this time I do go to F major 7. And the point that I was trying to make earlier is that the reason that I chose to do F6 here is because of the fact that the melody drops down to F, and so if I had a major 7, that would create a flat 9, which, you know, is not common in the jazz language, and I love my flat 9s. But in this particular context, I think it works better to have that F, which is a minor third with the D. Sorry, have the D, which is a minor third with the F. And then, of course, now that we're in A minor, I can just do a 2-5-1 in A minor. Right, and then what happens here? A over G, which goes to F, but rather than going to F major, I go to F minor, and then guess what? That's 2 of E flat major. Right? And I just go B flat, dominant 7, and then I make it augmented, and the reason why is this F sharp leads really nicely to G, and then that's where the melody exists, right? So see if you can follow that. I'll play it slowly again, and then I'll play it fast, and then we'll switch to some other questions. Anyway, that is that tune. And just in case you were wondering, let me see if I can take this out without. Hopefully, I wonder if I can see how much battery I have left on my 28%. Okay, so if I just suddenly disappear, it's because the battery on my phone is gone. You guys can still see me, right? Let me know if you can still see me. Anyway, but I have the tune written out, and I'm uploading it to Musical Neo, and so you guys can check that out if you want. So, okay, cool. So hopefully that makes some sense. So I've got 28% of battery life. So I'll take questions for anyone would have them. Ear training. Okay. So ear training is interesting because it's something that a lot of people talk about and advocate for its importance, which is good. But there are also a lot of, thanks, I appreciate it, Doc. There are a lot of aspects of ear training that are often woefully neglected. Like, for example, like timbral ear training, right? I'll be uploading the tune, not to get off the rails here, I'll be uploading the tune performance to my YouTube channel, and then I'll be uploading it to my Music Anea account, which is linked in all of my videos. If you want to come here earlier, Joey, I played the lick. Jazz is super fun. You might get lost, but at the same time, a lot of it makes a lot of sense. I think too many people think that jazz just is like all over the place, but especially bebop tends to be very functional. Makes a lot of sense, kind of, it's very logical, and especially like, little decorations and things. You can be creative, but, there's just as much of a common practice to bebop jazz as there is in classical music, right? You look at, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, all the famous jazz bebop players, and you look at their playing, and you find just as many commonalities as you do between, like, Mozart and Handel and all the other stuff. To answer the original question, timbral... Wait, let me one question at a time. I guess I can look and go through them individually, so fine. It's just on my phone, it's so tiny. To answer the original question, timbral ear training is really, really important. Can you tell the difference between a bass clarinet and a B-flat clarinet and an A clarinet, right? All of those little details, that's really important for orchestration. Rhythmic ear training, like, can you notate that? You know exactly what that is? That's really important for getting the rhythms in your ear. And people tend to be better with one or the other, right? The percussionists tend to be really good naturally at rhythmic ear training, but not so good with the melodic stuff and intervals. Whereas, and this is stereotyping, of course, just my experience being a theory TA at Furman for several years, but, singers tend to be really good with intervallic, recognizing intervals, but not as good with rhythm. And then pianists tend to be better at recognizing harmony by ear, whereas linear players, not so much. So it's just one of those things. But anyway, timbral ear training, that's a huge thing that I think is really important. Also frequency, right? If you're going to mix your music, knowing, how the pitches on the piano correspond to frequency and listening for whether or not certain aspects of your mix are overdone and whether or not you can listen and be like, oh yeah, 250, right? And of course, obviously, Jacob Collier goes crazy with this kind of stuff because he has perfect pitch. You don't have to be like, oh, the air conditioner is 330.5 hertz, and then it'd be like perfect, right? That's an alien skill that I certainly don't possess anything anywhere close to that. But having a general understanding and relative, really, really good relative pitch, and I would just say rhythm, melody, chordal. Yeah, definitely Golden Blues. And timbral, right? Okay, so let me go and look at some of these other questions. Oh, yeah. Okay, so I can just scroll up. Oh, that's nice. Like I said, if it just cuts out, then that just means that my phone battery died, so we'll keep going. What are some dreamy jazz chords? I mean, like, you can't go wrong with the C major pentatonic chord, because it's modally ambiguous. The nice thing about the pentatonic scale, this is probably going to blow you all's minds. So we use a 12-tone equally tempered tuning system. Therefore, we have 12 pitches. They're all equidistant to one another, and so you get a clock face with varying degrees of symmetry depending upon what kinds of interval cycles that you create. So you could create interval cycle of 1 and 11, which is the chromatic scale, 2 and 10, which is the whole tone scale, 3 and 9, which is the fully diminished seventh chord. If I've lost you already, don't worry about it. It's just math, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, 5-7 is an interval cycle. You can find this all out in set theory, which gives us a cycle of fifths. And because 5 and 7 are both prime numbers, neither of which are divisible into 12, and 12 is a number very rich in factors, which is why, too many people That's true, but there are lots of different kinds of pentatonic scales, which is important to understand. The specific pentatonic scale that I'm talking about is actually a subset of the 5/7 interval cycle, right? So if you go on the circle of fifths and you take any 5 notes that are right next to each other, you're going to get a pentatonic scale, right? Which is quite interesting. And then if you take a 6-note version of that, then you get one extension, and then the flat 9 interval, aka like F on top of C major, then that's the last one, that's the 7th one. Any more than that, and you lose the structural integrity of the scale. We don't need to get into the mathematics of it and all that stuff, because that's, kind of crazy and out there. But the original point that I was making, what was the original point that I was making? Oh, the pentatonic scale is completely modally ambiguous, right? So it's only on the outliers. If you have a 7-note pitch collection on the circle of fifths, if you sort of like take a given collection of 7 notes, it's only the pitch on the far right that's going to be Lydian, and the pitch on the far left that's going to be mixolydian, right? So if I have like C major, right? If I just have C major by itself, it's ambiguous where I'm located on the circle of fifths, right? But if I have that F sharp, well, C major with an F sharp can only exist inside of the pitch collection with F sharp and and all the other white keys. Anyway, so Dorian and Lydian sit on this side, Mixolydian sit and Phrygian sit on the other side. Ionian and Aeolian are actually ambiguous. It requires 2 extensions for you to imply those with 1 chord. But anyway, if you just play a chord with extensions that are comprised of the pentatonic scale, so let's say like the 13th and the 9th, right? Right. So what I'm playing essentially here is literally just C, G, E, A, D. That's literally just the pentatonic scale with a chordal voicing, right? Openly voiced C major. I would move the camera up, but it's you guys get it. Openly voiced C major, and then chordal voicing, right? Right. That's a pretty dreamy sound because it's very relaxed and it doesn't imply a particular mode. If you add a major 7th, that narrows us down. That says we can't be a Mixolydian, but we could be in Lydian or Ionian, right? And of course, if you play, there are essentially 3 categories of extensions within there are categories and subcategories, but there are 2 kinds of extensions. There are those that exist inside of a diatonic pitch collection and those that are chromatic. In the category of diatonic extensions, there are 3 categories. There are extensions which are completely modally ambiguous. Those are the pentatonic scale, so that would be the 13th and the 9th on major, and it would be the 11th and the 7th on minor, right? Completely ambiguous. You don't know whether or not you're in Dorian, Phrygian, or Aeolian. You don't know whether or not you're in Ionian, Lydian, or Mixolydian. And then the second category are those extensions which narrow you down from the possibilities of 3 to the possibilities of 2. So that's the major 7th on C major. That lets us know we're not in Mixolydian, but we could be in Lydian and we could be in Ionian. And the other thing is the 11th on a major chord, so F on top of C major. That lets us know that we are in either Mixolydian or Ionian, but not in Lydian, so it narrows us down to 2 possibilities. And there are there are also the same respective tones in minor, and you can figure that out yourself. I don't have to go through those and be super methodical about it. But then there's the third final category, which there are those extensions which are unambiguously infer a particular mode. Of course, there's the classic Lydian sharp 11 that says, hey, we were in Lydian. Gosh darn it, there's no other. The only other pitch collection that could belong in is the octatonic scale, and the ear, because it's more used to hearing diatonic modes and pitch collections, is going to assume that it's Lydian, generally speaking, as opposed to octatonic. Obviously, to some extent, that depends upon context, and I like to toy with people's ears and things like that. But and then, of course, there's the B flat on top of C, or the dominant 7th, the legendary dominant 7th, which is implying Mixolydian, which is one of the reasons why anytime you play like a dominant 7th sonority, you know exactly where it's supposed to go, because only one dominant 7th chord exists in every side of every diatonic pitch collection, because the dominant 7th chord contains a tritone, and there's only one tritone in every diatonic pitch collection. There are a crap ton of fifths, but there's only one tritone, and so the tritone lets you know I'm on this part of a scale, I'm in this diatonic, whereas if I just play a perfect fifth, if I just play C major, are we in C major, are we in F major, are we in G major? It doesn't know. If I just play a C and a G without an E, are we in C minor, are we in, there are like 6 locations we could be in on the circle of fifths. So anyway, that opens up a whole giant wormhole, and I'm not going to go too crazy with that, but hopefully that at the very least whets your appetite with regards to some of that stuff. Let's see. What standards would you recommend to learn common jazz tropes? You can't go wrong with Autumn Leaves, and the reason is because it has 2 5/1s, right, that's just 2-5-1 in major, and then 2-5-1 in minor, right? So if you're trying to practice, if you practice if you're trying to practice stuff to play on top of 2 5-1s in major and in minor, just play Autumn Leaves in all 12 keys, and that covers it, right? Autumn Leaves is great because it's very harmonically simple, right? It's just an A section, a B section, all of which completely make, it's literally just 2 5-1 in major and then 2 5-1 in the relative minor. So that's what I would recommend. Just play Autumn Leaves, play on and the harmonic rhythm is pretty slow, right? If you're playing something like something like A Moment's Notice, that, like, the harmonic rhythm is so quick that your brain doesn't have a chance to, like, figure out what's going on. So because Autumn Leaves is like 1 chord per bar, that's what I would say. I'd say that's a good tune to practice underneath. Let me see what my battery is. Okay. So Ben, I'm like 13 years old and I'm really trying to get me of my works combined. How would you go about doing this? I'm not sure what you're saying. Just reformulate your question and try and be clear. My pleasure, Eduardo. Can you just separate and arrange different parts such as horns and strings so that all parts can blend well? Yeah, I mean that's a giant serious and also, like, jazz has its own. There's a lot of parallel harmony in jazz that you don't get in classical music. Classical music tends to enjoy independence of parts, whereas with jazz, since how do you get it performed? Well, I would say the first, it's a kind of, it's sort of like, I need a job to get a car, but I can't get a job without a car. It's kind of one of those chicken and egg problems because, like, you can't really get your works performed if you don't have any experience writing live music because the music that you write is gonna not be playable, right? That's just the reality of it. When I first wrote music for live players, it was crap, and not that it was musically crap necessarily, but it was not performable because I didn't know anything about writing for the instruments. And so it's hard because, like, I need to stop reading the comments because they're distracting me, so I'm so ADHD. When you need to write for live players to get experience so that you can write for live players. So what I would say is find some friends. If you have do you have any violinist friends or guitar friends? Make friends, right? And just, write something and then just share it to them and let them be like, okay, I like this part. I like this part. This double stop is not playable. You can't do snap pits in that high register because you can't pull the string far enough off the board. You can't play pianissimo and the extreme register, low register of the bassoon. Crap like that, right? The other thing that you can do, and it depends upon how intellectual and, like, curious you are. I'm a freaking nerd when it comes to this stuff, right? I'm the type of kid that, for better and for worse, when I was like 12 years old, I was like, oh, let me get an orchestration manual and read through the whole thing, right? So I just learned as much as I possibly could, just, but I know some people are not like that. Some people, like, the information just escapes them and they tend to be more intuitive when it comes to these things. And so, if you can manage to have the self-discipline to just read through all of that crap and at least absorb 80% of it, then at the very least when you show someone, I would also say, learn how to get really good at notation, right? This is like the biggest thing that will make other musicians not take your music seriously, right? If you hand someone a piece of music, I don't care if it's frickin' as great as Tchaikovsky's Sixth Symphony, right? But if you hand it to them and there's like one bar stretched out at the end and there are a bunch of empty bars that you didn't delete and there are note collisions and you're in G major but you spell the F sharp as an F sharp instead of G flat, hey Gideon, if you spell the F sharp as a G flat, then the musicians are going to look at that and be like, oh, he doesn't even know what he's doing, even though the music might be great and they may not have discovered that. So if you can, like, engrave your music professionally and get all the basics of music notation down and provide them a decent looking thing, then you're that much more likely for them to be able to, like, oh, this looks nice and professional. Like, sure, yeah, I'll try it out, and maybe they'll play it for you. And some people are going to be sticklers about that, but I found that some people are really nice. Like, I know a flautist, a flute player, and she's like, oh yeah, write something for me. Like, let me play something. Like, I'll tell you, and she's like super. And I've met instrumentalists who are not really helpful, but I've met plenty of instrumentalists who love, collaborating. So I would say just make friends with musicians. I mean, that's the best advice that I can give. Okay, let me go through. In your harmonic relativity video, you're talking about how you're going to make a video on how to use minor chords and using the same principle, and how do I know what scales I can use over which chords. So, as far as what scales go over each chords, right, that's literally just a matter of just thinking about the possibilities. It's just like I talked about earlier, right? If you have a major chord, then all you have to do is just think about what are all the scales. There aren't that many, right? There's literally like the diatonic modes, the modes of melodic minor, the modes of harmonic minor, the modes of doubly harmonic minor, then there are the pentatonic scales, and there's the Japanese scale, right, which are essentially just subsets of the diatonic pitch collection, so I wouldn't really consider them as substantively different categories. And then there are the symmetrical scales, which are the chromatic scale and the whole tone scale, which are completely symmetrical, and then the octatonic scale and hexatonic scale are partially symmetrical, right? Once you have all those scales, there aren't really any other scales unless you want to get into microtonal land. And so then it's literally just a matter of like, what, chord do I have and what scale? And if you keep the scale consistent over time, and it gives you a sense of like smoothness, right? But if you change the scale all the time, it gives you the sense of like moving around. And it all depends upon what you want. I don't think one is better than the other. I think it's just a matter of like, if I change modes all the time, then you get the sense of like, wow. Whereas if I keep the same mode, right, but change the pitch collection, then it's like half weird. But then if I keep the same mode, right, and I go to a pitch collection that's nearby, then it's even smoother, right? And so there's voice leading smooth, there's moving on the circle of fifth smooth, and then there's modality consistency smooth, right? So, I could go through all of the possibilities individually, but it's really just as simple as just like mathematically computing what the possibilities are, there aren't as many as you'd think. Okay, we'll do a few more because my voice is dying. Trying to find okay, let's see. How do you make repetitiveness in your compositions make sense? I would say function change is a big thing, right? Like just what I did in the jazz. Sorry. Right. You can repeat the same note over and over again, and if you change the harmony underneath, change, it's basically just like half the stuff stays the same and half of the stuff changes, right? If the harmony and melody stays the same, change the rhythm and the texture. If the rhythm and the texture stays the same, change the melody and the harmony. Just think about all the different parameters of music and just make like half of them the same and half of them different, and that's literally the rule that I follow in my music. Okay, we'll do two more. Who would your favorite modern day composer is? Who's still alive? If we're saying like classical composer, oops, sorry, I'm like messing up my phone. That's a good question. I'll have to think about that. That's a really, 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 I don't know if I can pick a favorite. Of those who are dead but still modern, I would say Radhavara is definitely up there. Radhavara and Samuel Barber, and Aaron Copland, some of his music. I would say my top three favorite pieces of music of all time right now are Samuel Barber's Piano Concerto, Aaron Copland's Organ Concerto, and Radhavara's Eighth Symphony. Those are like my three favorite pieces right now. Let's see. How can you approach a career in music? It just depends upon like I'm sorry, but I can't answer that question. Save that for the next live stream. I'm doing one soon when I reach 20,000 subscribers. Save that. That's just a massive, and that's not a topic that I just want to give some sort of light advice. So we'll save that for later. Studying before their time. What do you think of learning by studying more modern composers? I think you should study any and every composer who grabs your attention. That's literally all that I do, is just like listen to a crap ton of music by as many different people as possible in as many different genres. And it's not that I like all of it, right? But just listen, just like take in everything. And then if something comes out to me that I love, then I study the crap out of it and then synthesize that into my own style, right? So diversity, it's like going to a restaurant, right? You know, first thing you do is try out everything on the menu, right? And then you find out which things you like. If you try one thing and like it, but only stick to that thing, then you could be missing out on all kinds of other exotic flavors, right? That you just aren't aware of because you never tried those things. So it takes the courage to try out everything on the menu, knowing that you're not going to like a lot of the things and maybe waste some money, so to speak, or waste some time listening to music in this case. And then once you find what you do like, then you know, and then you can synthesize those things into your own style, right? And if your listening list is diverse enough, then when you synthesize things, what results is hopefully your own voice, right? Whereas if all you ever listen to is Hans Zimmer, then you're going to sound like a Hans Zimmer hack. If all you ever listen to is John Williams, you're going to sound like a John Williams hack. If all you ever listen to is Joe Hisashi, then you're going to sound like a Joe Hisashi hack. If all you ever listen to is Beethoven, you're going to sound like a Beethoven hack, right? So the way to achieve your own voice, I would say, is just to expand your horizons musically, to listen to as many diverse influences as possible. For dark chromatic media and stuff, cool finger patterns. Yeah, I think that'll probably be it for now. There's one last thing I want to show you before I leave, which is a really chill sounding Art Tatum run, which is pretty simple. It's an E flat major, right? So if I have a 2-5-1 in E flat major, that run there, right? So that run is pretty chill, right? So the actual run is essentially just every note of C minor, right, or a E flat major, except for that flat 9 interval, right? So it's just on the piano 3-2-1, 3-2-1, right? But you start out with that, right? Right, and then you can, you know, I went to like F, and you can use it over any chord. I can go. That's using it on the 2 chord. You could use it on 5. That's right. You could also use it on 1, right? Right. You could also use it on 6, right? So it's a really easy run to play, and you know, if you can get it really fast, you know, I can't play that fast, right? But if you can get it really fast, then you get that nice bubbly. Art Tatum could play those things so fast, and he often used just like only a few of his fingers to play those things. But anyway, so that's a simple little Art Tatum run, nothing too complicated. You know, learn it in different keys, and you can play it over 2, 5, or 1, or 6. So there you go. All right, this has been a super fun impromptu live stream. As always, I am pleasantly surprised by how many people showed up for something I didn't announce. So this will be up on YouTube later. I'll be posting that new jazz tune. I'll be posting more of the how to write a fantasy main theme series. And if you haven't bought my part writing book, please buy it. 30 days left, and I think we've just got just a little over $1,000 still to raise. And I would love to be able to actually write the book, which would be great. So until next time. Have a great day. Talk to you later. If I can figure out how to turn this thing off.